Hey everybody, this is Dave Dugdale, learningdslrvideo.com. I'm up at 11,000 feet in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. Got Mount Lincoln right over to my left, and I am lit by an iPad on its lowest setting. And I'm shooting with the A7S at ISO 25,600. I thought this would be a great way to demonstrate what this camera can do for this particular review. As you guys know, I did my GH4 review about a month ago, and I talked about where I was trying to decide whether I wanted to buy that or this camera, the A7S. And what you're gonna see me do through this review is kind of struggle back and forth on which camera I want to buy. Both these cameras are kind of like an apples orange comparisons because the GH4 has got a micro four thirds sensor, which is like 4 times. You could fit 4 of those on the A7S sensor because the A7S is a full frame sensor. So a lot of people might be thinking this is not really a fair comparison, but they are equal in one manner, is they're both very clean. And by clean, I mean they're free of aliasing and moire. And the GH4 is just really clean in terms of the detail that you can get, much better than like a 5D Mark III like I demonstrated in my last video. And the A7S is very clean in terms of basically not having to fight noise at high ISO. Because we're shooting at 25,000 right now and it looks pretty darn good.
All right, just like with the GH4 review, the A7S is a very important camera, so it's going to be a long review. You will not hurt my feelings whatsoever. If you want to go ahead and skip to the end, go ahead and click on the conclusion button. If you do not want to watch all the side-by-side comparisons and you just want to see my final thoughts at the end and which camera I ended up buying. So because I have sold my 5D Mark III and I have sold my old T3i and a few other Canon lenses. So what I like to do is I'm going to get right into it, a few detail tests. One of the things I wanted to see is how the A7S matched up to the 4K of the GH4. And you're going to see in this test, what you're looking for is, you know, the detail around these blades of grass. Because sometimes what you'll get, especially with the 5D Mark III, you'll get some nasty haloing and some artifacts around it. So let's get right to it. So on the left-hand side, we've got the GH4, and on the right-hand side, we've got the A7S. And as you can see, the GH4 is obviously more detailed, but the A7S is not doing too bad. It's not like a big landslide like it was with the 5D Mark III. The next test I want to go to is the A7S on the left and the 5D Mark III on the right. And I've turned the sharpness all the way down in both cameras, and then I've added equal amount of sharpness in post. And as you can see, the A7S is just totally blowing the doors off the 5D Mark III in terms of detail. The next test I wanted to do was, okay, I'm not going to do any sharpening in post at all, and I want to see what it is like their default settings. So for Canon, they call it sharpness. I put it at 0 level, and on the A7S, I put it at its 0 level as before. And as you can see, you know, there's this weird, nasty haloing going on with the 5D Mark III. So the next test I wanted to see is going back to the GH4 versus the A7S in terms of 60 frames per second, because I love shooting in slow motion, and see which one works well. And as you can see here, I focused at the end of the balance beam where those letters are. And as you can see, as she gets closer to those letters, yeah, the A7S is just totally destroying the GH4 in terms of detail here at 60 frames per second. Now the key here is it's shot at ISO 3200, and when you shoot at higher ISOs, I've noticed that the GH4 detail just starts crumbling because you get all this noise coming into the image and it just makes it soft. So that's pretty much it right off the bat. You know, GH4 is definitely winning, but the A7S holding its own. 5D Mark III is totally losing. So next up, I wanted to compare hair. For some reason, when I was shooting with the GH4, a lot of times I noticed the hair had this kind of, I don't know what the right word is, maybe brittle feeling to it. There's maybe some artifacts, especially when I was shooting the GH4 with the sharpness at its default setting. So after a while, I was like, I just need to turn it all the way down, and that definitely helped. Let me kind of demonstrate this to you. So on the left is the GH4 at -5, and on the right it's GH4 at its default sharpness setting. And then what I did next is I -5 on the left, but I added sharpness in post, and that definitely helped getting rid of this kind of brittle feel to it. And Stu Matchewitz, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, took a look at the GH4 as well, and he was kind of complaining a little bit about this kind of brittle feel to it. So you definitely need to turn the sharpness all the way down, especially if you're doing kind of a close-up of somebody. So here in this last test, here is the GH4 on the left at f2.8, A7S at 5.6, just to keep things even. And you'll see that with -5 sharpness, but sharpness added in post for the GH4, it looks pretty decent, but I would say that the A7S actually resolves fine detail, like in close-ups of not necessarily like blades of grass, but in terms of hair and, you know, people's faces and stuff like that, just a little bit better. All right, next up I want to talk about rolling shutter. It's definitely, I think a lot of people have shied away from this camera because of the rolling shutter. So I want to go ahead and show you some examples. So right off the bat, here we go. We're GH4 on the left, 4K downsampled in the A7S. And you're gonna see me bumping the camera, which happens a lot. You know, you just might bump the camera accidentally and you'll get that kind of jello. And the A7S definitely has a lot more rolling shutter than the GH4. Now in this example, like this is gonna happen to you a lot with the A7S. Like when you reposition, I think I was on a monopod this day, and I actually repositioned the camera right about here. And like, whoa, yeah, there's a lot of jello right there. Because I like the reflections right there that I saw with the gears, so I just want to move the camera. And as you can see, there's just a lot of rolling shutter. So you got to be really careful, and those moments where you change from one angle to the other, you might not have decent material to use and just gonna have to cut it out. James Drake came by again with his Red Epic, which is great, and he was interested in the A7S, so we did some rolling shutter tests. And as you can see, the A7S is pretty nasty with this digital target. And then when you compare it to the Red Epic, yeah, it's definitely not doing as well, because Red Epic does awesome when it comes to rolling shutter. The next test we wanted to do, and this one really surprised me, is James went ahead and strapped the A7S onto the Red Epic and ran with it. And as you'll see here, this is the A7S footage. Actually, this is an S-Log2. It's not been graded, but it's not bad. You know, he's running with it like crazy. And in this situation right here, you know, in like an action film or something where you're chasing after somebody, it's not that bad. So the next thing I wanted to do is, if you do whip pans a lot, and there's a director, I think his name is Paul Thomas Anderson. I think in his beginning of his career, he did a lot of whip pans where he would kind of like zoom in slowly to one actor, and another actor would be coming in the room, and he'd whip over to the other actor, and the other actor might say, "Hey Ken, how's it going?" And whip pan, Ken says, "Not too good, you're stealing all my market share." So what you can do is I put a little stick in the middle here, and you can see I corrected the footage in post, and it was actually really easy to do in After Effects. It wasn't that hard at all. So when you do these whip pans, you'll definitely see it as I'm going back and forth. You can correct it. It takes a little bit of time in post, but it was actually a lot faster than I thought. If you're doing whip pans, it's not that big of a deal. If you're moving your tripod around a lot and you want to keep some of that footage, it might be a big deal. If you're doing action films with your running with it, it didn't look that bad. So I'm kind of on the fence here, you know, whether it's really a bad thing or it's acceptable. I wish we didn't have it, but we definitely do, and you just have to learn to live with it when you shoot. All right, next up I want to talk about aliasing, because occasionally, and it didn't happen that often, but I would see a little bit of aliasing with the GH4 compared to the A7S. And here's a really good example, it's like one of the very few examples, is you'll notice these cables at the very bottom near her feet. When you watch this at full scale, you'll notice that the GH4, those cables have just a slight bit of aliasing. But to be honest with you, it was like few and far between. I mean, I shot with both these cameras, you know, hundreds if not thousands of clips, and looked at each one very detailed. Yeah, the GH4 does awesome. This is just one of these rare occurrences where I had just a little bit of aliasing going on with the GH4. All right, next up I want to talk about depth of field real quick. I covered this a lot in my last review of the difference between micro four thirds and full frame. And I just want to show you a little pop quiz here. Which one do you think is which? The A7S being full frame or the micro four thirds GH4? Can you guess which one is which? I mean, looking at her necklace, her hair. Here, I'll give you a hint. I'll play a little bit of the background out of focus for you to see. This is all done handheld, and see if you can tell which one's which. And basically it's the GH4 on the left and the A7S. And I'm just trying to prove a point that you can get really good shallow depth of field with the GH4 as well. So some people have emailed me with examples of really heavy purple fringing they've gotten with their A7S in a really heavily backlit situation. So I wanted to try it myself, but to be honest with you, the FE lenses, my Canon lenses, my Tamron, Tokina lenses, I never ran into it. About the best example I can find is GH4 on the left, A7S on the right, and you can see in the window where that window divider is, you can see the A7 has a little bit of fringing, and where the GH4 really doesn't have any. I don't know. A lot of people have complained about it, but from what I can see, it really wasn't that big of an issue. All right, next up I want to talk about low light. Obviously the A7S is going to beat the GH4, and it actually beat my 5D Mark III in a lot of instances as well, because you can just go crazy high ISO in these night scenes that I'm showing you right here. So what I wanted to do in terms of comparing the two cameras, I didn't want to do it in like complete darkness. I was doing it just before the sun came up. And as you can see at ISO 1600, the GH4 is definitely showing some noise, where the A7S, I'm looking for noise and it's really hard to find. It's pretty darn amazing at ISO 1600 on the A7S. And then when we move to ISO 3200, then the noise just gets even worse in the GH4, where again, the A7S is just holding its own. Going to ISO 6400, and yeah, the GH4 is, I wouldn't really shoot that high with the GH4 unless you really had to. You can see definitely in the grass, all that detail is just gone, and it's just dancing around with some nasty noise. Next up, I compared the Red Epic at ISO 3200 to the A7S at ISO 3200 with S-Log2. And as you can see, the A7S is just so clean compared to the Red Epic. And the Red Epic has never been a camera that really shines in low light, so we kind of expected this, but it was just quite a dramatic difference. Here is the A7S on the left and the GH4 on the right, and you can see we're shooting at S-Log2, which we'll explain more about later, but it retains a lot more of that shadow information. Many times I was looking for banding on the A7S and GH4. Many situations I was just hunting around, just couldn't find it. And then this one evening I was shooting the birds. I definitely saw it on the A7S. And as you can see here, there's these big concentric bands of gradient going between light blue and dark blue. You can see it all over the place. Even on Cine4 I could get it as well, but I could never really get this on the GH4. This is about the only time I could find it on the A7S. It didn't happen that often. And again, I'm not pushing image. I'm not adding contrast or saturation in post to bring it out more. These are the actual raw images right off the camera. So I guess you could say maybe the GH4 may be a little bit better, because I could never get that one to band. But definitely the A7S in this particular instance was doing some banding on me. And again, I don't know if it's really that big of a deal, because this is one of the only clips I could find where the A7S was banding. All right, next up, we're going to talk about Picture Profile 7. You're not going to find this in the manual. You won't even find it in the menu where it says S-Log2, but just believe me, I found it online. PP7 is S-Log2 on the A7S. And what that is basically a very professional logarithmic profile that's been handed down from their higher end cameras and has been brought down to this camera that only costs around $2,500, which is great. It's a very powerful tool. Some colorists will tell you that, A7S only outputs in 8-bit and you're going to run into banding issues. But for me, I really enjoy having this tool at this price range, because you get in situations like this where you have this backlit situation where I'm exposing for the noses, the whites of the nose on the horses, and this is at neutral with the contrast turned all the way down. But yet if I show you the S-Log version, here's S-Log2, is like, look at all the other information you have in the hair and in the shadows of where these horses are that you would never have before with any sort of standard or neutral picture style with everything turned down. So basically S-Log2 is saying to the camera, hey, I've got it. I'm going to handle all the grading later. Let me handle it. Just give me the flattest image you can. And that, definitely increases the dynamic range of the camera. which gives you a lot more options in post, which is wonderful. Now, I will tell you, I'm not a professional colorist, and a lot of situations I just couldn't get S-Log2 to look great. I think it looks pretty good in this swipe that I'm doing here of the girl talking on the phone, but in most situations, I would either use Cine2 or Cine4, since they're already, they protect the highlights a bit more and they protect the shadows, but they're not as aggressive as S-Log2. You choose S-Log2, you're gonna need an ND filter because it starts off at ISO 3200 as its base. So you're gonna have to invest in some pretty heavy ND. Here I'm shooting at natural, and this next clip is Cine2. And just to show you what the difference between Cine2 and S-Log is right here. This is S-Log2. So it kind of gives you a really good feel for what's going on in terms of what it's doing to the highlights and the shadows. And like I said, I've been shooting a lot with Cine2 and Cine4, and then I reserve S-Log2 for really high contrast situations or really, really dark situations. Let me show you an example of Cine2 and Cine4. And you can see basically the difference here is look at the trees. And you can see that Cine2 is giving us a little bit more information in the shadows. All right, next up I want to talk about exposing for S-Log2. I am not a Sony classified expert, whatever they call them. I am not a professional colorist, but I will tell you my recommendation for exposing with the A7S, and that is to expose to the right because of noise. Now, I've read a lot of the white papers Sony's put out. I've talked to some of their professional experts, and they've, some of the professional experts say you can do it a lot of different ways. One of the ways they recommend, like in the white papers, is to expose like 2 stops under, or IRE 32 or about 40 on the A7S for middle gray. I don't think that's the best. Let me show you why. Here we got S-Log2 even exposure. So middle gray is right at 50. This is 2 stops under, so IRE maybe 32. And this is 2 stops over. And look how clean 2 stops over is. It's just so clean. Let me play that for you again. Even exposure, not too bad. 2 stops under, quite noisy. And 2 stops over. So if I were you, what do you want? You want a little bit more dynamic range, or do you want a lot less noise? Which one do you want? For me, I would choose a lot less noise than maybe a slight bit of dynamic range, which I understand the mathematics behind it. People have explained it to me why you want to be underexposing. But when I look at the images, I'm like, shoot to the right. Just set your zebras at 100. Once you see zebras, back it off on that particular part of the image that you don't want to overexpose, and you'll be fine. You'll have a very nice, clean image. If anybody else is out there has a recommendation on how to expose for this S-Log2, definitely let me know, because I am brand new to S-Log2. But in my experience, I would just say expose to the right. All right, next up I want to show you a lot of different color profiles, color gamuts. Here's movie. Here's still in picture profile 2. Here's matrix and PP3. Here's cinema with Cine1. Now here's Cine with Cine2. And there's Cine with Cine3. And here's Cine4 with Pro. And here's like S-Log2 with S-Gamut. And the color of the sky just doesn't look right to me. There's lots of different combinations. There's lots of different ways to screw it up. And I've screwed it up many times. And I'm still I'm getting closer, and I have confidence in myself that I'm going to get to the look that I want in camera. There's many combinations and many different lighting situations that you can use it in. I'll give you an example. Here's cinema with my daughter's hair. Here's movie, and my daughter's hair does not look this color. This is has more of a reddish tone. My daughter doesn't have that kind of hair. Here's Pro, and we've got the 709 Matrix. And the last one, which actually looks the closest, is S-Gamut. And kind of to show you right side by side here, S-Gamut on the far right is actually the most accurate color in terms of my daughter's hair. But when we go back to the color of the sky here with S-Log2 and S-Gamut, that doesn't look right at all. And the color of the water doesn't look right at all. Here you give you another example. Here's the GH4 on the right, A7S on the left. And this is one of those colors where I think the GH4, the color of the sky, looks correct. Here's another situation. Here's one color space, and you can see the sky does not look right. And then boom, the sky looks much better, but sky still is not maybe the most correct color. Again, Sony has a very different interpretation. I would say Canon leads the way here in terms of color, and then the GH4, and then the Sony. Take that with a grain of salt because I am still playing around with color. One last thing about color I want to mention is a video by David Carstens. He did an excellent video showing the different color profiles in lots of different situations, from underexposed to overexposed. And what he have found in some situations is the color can shift. For instance, if you're underexposing, I think he said that the color was leaning a little bit more to magenta. And if you started to overexpose in S-Log2, the color would kind of lean more towards green. And he has some excellent examples, which he let me display here for a few seconds. But definitely go check out his video because he's much more qualified in terms of color than I am. All right, dynamic range. Dynamic range is like open up a can of worms or asking for a fight if you wanted to say that one camera has more than the other, because there's so many different parameters. There's so many different things to screw up a test, basically, from, you know, what color profile are you in? What contrast setting do you have it on? You know, there's so many different things. S-Log2, this or that. But I will tell you, just generically, I'm going to put myself out there and say that GH4 with Cine D, the A7S with S-Log2 especially, has more dynamic, usable dynamic range than like the 5D Mark III, even with Cine style. That's about all I'm going to say in terms of which one wins. In terms of which one wins in terms of the A7S and the GH4, let me show you some examples. So here I'm exposing for the skin. Here's the GH4. Now look for the blown out sky when we go to the A7S, and obviously you can see more sky right there. So in that situation, you know, the A7S wins. But what about this situation where if you look in the shadows, there's the GH4 is on the right, A7S on the left, and I'm going by the skin, I expose for the skin. If you look in the dark shadows, you might say the GH4 is kind of winning. It's really hard to say, you know. I don't know. Scientifically, I have no idea. All the clips I've done, I would say they're kind of about even, but I will say generically, they're better than the 5D Mark III. All right, unfortunately at the time of this recording, there's only 5 FE lenses. The ones that are full frame, native, work on this particular mount. You can get other Sony lenses that are APS-C that'll work on this camera as well, but I'm more interested in the ones that are native, that have fast autofocus, that are designed for this camera. I've tried 2 of them, the 24-70, 7200. They're both f4 constant. And coming from Canon, I really like having f2.8, which is really nice to have a little extra light, more shallow depth of field, all that wonderful goodness. I talked to Sony a few times, 2 different people, and they kind of gave the same answer, like we can do f2.8 constant, but it will kind of unbalance the camera. Camera's so light, we don't want to go there, kind of thing. And if you look at the roadmap of lenses that they plan to develop in, they don't have anything listed. But I've kind of asked the question over and over again. If you read between the lines, it sounds like they might be open to it in the future, making an f2.8 zoom. And so I might at some point actually switch to being a zoom shooter to having several primes with this particular camera, because I do like having that focus speed. So one of the first things I got to tell you about is with these FE lenses, they have something that's kind of a real deal breaker for me. So let me show you what that is. Okay, here's the FE 24-70 f4 lens, and you can see I'm focusing really fast back and forth from far to near, and now you can see that meter that's on the screen. I'm going really slow. So what does that mean? Well, it's like a logarithmic kind of barrel twist speed thing going on, which is a big deal breaker. So you cannot repeat focus moves. You can't like set a marker and then set another marker, because if you go at a slightly different speed, you're going to have a totally different response in terms of, you know, the near and far distance. You can't repeat a focus move. And the same thing is happening on the 7200. You see I'm going fast back and forth, and then when I go very slow, the same thing happens. You can't repeat a focus move if you're changing it ever so slightly in terms of speed. So for me, that's really a big deal breaker. So I was thinking originally I was going to sell all my Canon full frame glass and I was going to get all the new Sony glass, but I decided to keep my Tamron 24-70, my Canon 70-200, and my Tachina 16-28 because of this issue. So with the Canon glass, you can, but the big unfortunate part, which we're going to talk about in the stills later, is even when you use a Metabones adapter with the Canon glass on the A7S, which works. Your focus speed in terms of photography just goes down the drain, which is pretty unacceptable. But for video, most people are going to be focusing manually anyway, so using Canon glass in this case works really well. I thought it'd be fun for you guys to somehow experience what it's like to shoot with stills and video on the A7S with Canon glass. So I rigged up my iPhone in such a way where you could see the back of the screen. Unfortunately, in this picture, I've got some Sony glass mounted, but all the video you're about to see is done with Canon glass. As you can see, I'm focusing on a distant subject, and I pulled back out again. And one of the wonderful features of this camera that nobody else, I think, even has is you can punch in while recording. So I'm recording right here, and I'm grab focus on her hair. Boom, I'm a little bit slow. I could probably do that a little bit faster. Punch back out, and I've got her in focus. Same thing, I'm gonna go for these flags, check the focus on the flags, zoom in, got the focus, zoom back out again. It's just a wonderful feature to have. Next up, I wanted to show you what it's like to shoot stills with the A7S with Canon glass. Here I'm shooting at f2.8, and I'm gonna rattle off, so I got the focus, I zoom in twice, boom, 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 boom. And there's the final image. Let's do one more of this girl, the lifeguard. It's kind of odd having a lifeguard at a swim meet. And there's the final image. All right, here you can hear me rattling through pictures on the GH4 and A7S in burst mode for photography. The GH4 obviously is going to win here. It's much faster, especially when it comes to continuous autofocus. The A7S is just really, really slow. I would not recommend this camera for sports photography at all. Let me show you an example. Here's a girl on a trampoline. At the very first frame of continuous autofocus on the A7S, it was in focus. By the time she gets closer, it's all out of focus. I want to share some pictures taken with this 12 megapixel sensor. So this first one is, I believe I shot this at ISO 3200. It was a long time, it was many months ago. And I just thought to myself, wow, look at how good the colors look for such a high ISO. It's really impressive. The next image is high dynamic range in terms of before and after. And you can really bring back those highlights. Like most cameras you can, but it seemed like you could maybe bring them back just a little bit farther on the A7S. Night photography, yeah, it's just a fantastic camera to have for night photography. Sports photography, like I said before, not the greatest. You're gonna get some great individual shots, but as soon as you go to continuous autofocus, this is going to happen to you a lot. It's just gonna be way out of focus, especially if you wanted to shoot wide open. HDR, yeah, HDR works just fine on this camera in terms of bringing individual files in. It has a mode for it. It doesn't really create it in camera, if I remember correctly, but you can definitely process it later. Indoor sports, it does work well, like in terms of like a balance beam here, where you've got gymnasium lights that, you know, it's not lit for professionals and you're dealing with low light and you really have to push the ISO to get the shutter speed that you want. In that case, if the person's on a plane like a balance beam, it works pretty well. Campfire, you got awesome around the campfire, just great for camping. It's just great for taking out on trips where you're doing a lot of hiking, because the thing is so small and lightweight, especially if you can mount like a prime lens on that thing. A lot lighter than my 5D Mark III was. And the last picture I want to show you is I took this picture. I didn't do much post-processing on it. And I thought to myself, what would this look like if I blew it up really big, like 20 by 30 from just Costco? This thing cost me like, I don't know, $10 to get printed. I don't know how well you can see it, but it looks pretty good. I mean, for 12 megapixels, blowing up 20 by 30, I don't think that you're supposed to go that high, but I'm looking at it and it looks really good for 12 megapixels. So if you're one of those people that are kind of scared, like, oh, 12 megapixels, I want 36. Well, you can get the A7R if you wanted 36 megapixel. I will say the only thing when I was doing portrait work, if you want to zoom in like 1:1, like, and you're used to the 5D Mark III, how 22 megapixels feels when you zoom in, you're not going to have that same sensation when you go 1:1 with the A7S, because it's just not going to zoom in as far if you're doing like portrait retouching work. In that case, you might want to go with a higher megapixel camera. All right, it wouldn't be right if I didn't nitpick about something on the A7S. Actually, there's a few items that are more than just nitpicky, like we talked about with the FE lenses and not being able to repeat a focus move. That's more than nitpicky. That I wish they would fix that with a firmware update, so you could use the FE lenses and they were a constant. They didn't vary like logarithmic in terms of speed. So one of the first items I want to talk about is where the record button is placed. I talked to Sony and I'm like, Sony, can you just remap this? This is an easy fix. I understand they probably developed the A7, the A7R first. It was a photography machine, and then came out the A7S, which is really a video machine. And they've given us all these great tools like focus peaking and zebras and all this great stuff for video. And they put the record button in a really awkward situation. It's way off to the side. So if they remap the shutter or remap the C2 button to be able to, when you press it, it records video, that would be awesome. So the next thing I want to talk about is the histogram. I don't know why, but anytime you change anything, A7S is on the left. I'm changing the aperture here, and you can see the histogram goes away, and then it comes back. Don't make it go away while I'm changing stuff on the screen so I can see what's happening in real time. And the same thing goes with shutter and ISO. Keep the histogram on the screen. It's a tool for that exact moment, and you're taking it away from me. So it just makes things go a lot slower if I lose the histogram. The next thing I want to talk about is white balance. And let me demonstrate. A7S is on the left. Let's say if I want to do a custom white balance, well, I can't in movie mode. I have to go all the way to stills mode, then press white balance, then find where I want to put the white. And you can see I'll press the button right there. I capture it. One of the good things, however, is it shows you some of the information like the magenta shift, the Kelvin, and then you can register it. But then you have to go back to movie mode, and then you can actually start shooting. So I wish they would fix that in such a way where you can do custom white balance in video mode. Okay, the other thing, like I've talked about before, is just the focus speed with Canon lenses. It takes about 4 seconds. Here, listen in. I'm pressing now. Yeah, that takes really long time to acquire focus, which is unfortunate. All right, bullet point list, A7S against the GH4 rapid fire, kind of things that I like and don't like. All right, GH4 definitely wins in terms of detail when you've got ISO 800 and lower, whereas A7S does really well when you're shooting at the higher ISOs. Next up is color. I gotta hand that to the GH4. I'm still somewhat frustrated with the A7S in terms of its color. I just haven't nailed it yet in terms of what profiles and what goes with what, but I'm definitely getting there. I think that might change over time. Next up, I don't know why I love this feature so much, but with the A7S, I love that you'd be able to punch in while you're recording, grab focus on something, and punch back out. Nobody even knows that you did it. That's just a fantastic feature. GH4, like I said before, has a little bit of brittleness in the hair, maybe a little too much over sharpening. And you know, people might say the GH4 looks too video, doesn't look filmic. Well, if you're one of those people, definitely get the A7S, because the A7S doesn't have that when on close-ups. But in terms of the GH4, in terms of wide establishing shot, in terms of detail, where you want everything in focus, you want all that detail, I think the GH4 is definitely the winner there. The GH4 has a touchscreen where the A7S doesn't. Touchscreen is not going to make you shoot better pictures or better video, but if you spend less time in the menu and you can get out of the menu quicker because of that, then you're probably going to get more shots than you would with the A7S. All right, the GH4 crashed quite a bit before I updated the firmware, and now that I've updated the firmware, it's only crashed once. So it's not terrible, but the A7S, when you use the apps, especially like the remote app, which I was just using here a moment ago, and it was crashing on me there. So that might be a combination of the Metabones adapter, because I had version 3 on this camera and it crashed all over the place. And then I got version 4, it cleaned it up much nicer. But when you use some of the apps, time-lapse app, the remote app, it can definitely crash where you have to pull the battery and it takes a long time for it to boot up. So they both kind of have their issues when it comes to crashing. All right, when it comes to the EVF and the screen between these two cameras, The GH4, I can tell you, you can definitely see aliasing and moire, even though it won't be recorded that way. You'll definitely see it in the display and in the EVF. Now, the A7S, I never saw that, but I, would go back and forth. I've done so many side-by-side comparisons on these two, and I gotta tell you, my preference, even though knowing that I can see the aliasing and moire on the screen, that I won't see it in post, I gravitated for some reason all the time to the GH4 because it seemed like it was a brighter, sharper, more contrasty image, and it was easier to get focus and exposure off of that. All right, obviously the A7S is way more time consuming to focus than the GH4. GH4 has some awesome focusing tools, especially for video, where the A7S, if you're using Canon glass, it's just not gonna happen. So definitely give the win to the GH4 on that one. The A7S has APS-C crop mode where you can actually punch in and get even closer. I love this feature, especially if you reach for the wrong lens, like a 24-70, and you really should have gotten the 70-200, and you're like, well, I need to do something, but I don't have time to switch out the lens. Boom, press that button, and you've got some nice close-up shots. All right, in terms of size and weight, the A7S might have a smaller body, but the GH4 is lighter overall when you look at the lenses. The Micro Four Thirds lenses are so tiny and small and lightweight. The full frame glass, or even the FE glass that Sony has, is definitely going to weigh the camera down. So definitely a win to the GH4 here. All right, in terms of apps, the GH4 is far superior. Far superior. You can get to so many different custom functions and do so many different things with it. It's just fantastic. The A7S is not a very good app at all, the remote app. In fact, I ran into an issue while recording this. When you saw me in different shirts before, this is shot in the picture style that I actually wanted to shoot it in, which is Cine4, where the other ones were shot in a different picture style because it's really confusing. What I did, just to let you know, I set up the camera, I put it in Cine4, set the exposure, got all the stuff, and then I wanted to use the iPhone just to press record and stop, which would be a fantastic feature. But what happened is after I got all set up, I went to the app, it switched all the things around on me. It didn't it didn't respect what I had set before. And you can't go in and change the picture style. You can't say I want Cine2 Cine4 because again, the app is very lacking. So all that stuff that you saw with different shirts with a more of a contrasty image, that was because the app, I just thought that the app was doing it correctly, and it wasn't doing it what I thought it should be doing. Okay, in terms of CPU usage, definitely A7S wins here because it's 1080. On average, when on playback, it would take 11 to 14% of my CPU, whereas the GH4 playing back would take about 25%. So for those people that have limited computers, maybe laptops that aren't very beefy, and you're running into drop frames a lot, the GH4 might drop a lot more frames because it's shot in 4K. Okay, battery. The GH4 battery is phenomenal. I've never tested how long it takes. I'm gonna say it's gonna be in the almost 4-hour range. I did test the A7S and it came in at 1 hour and 57 minutes for constant use. I was walking around with it at the zoo, shooting some videos, shooting some stills, kept it on the entire time, and it lasted 1 hour and 57 minutes. Whereas the GH4, I gotta say that thing's probably double. But put things in perspective, when you look at them side by side, the GH4 battery is about double the size, so it kind of makes sense. It's definitely not like other people have talked about, like Philip Bloom. The A7S battery is not in the league of the Blackmagic pocket camera, which lasts maybe 20 minutes. This is much more acceptable, and you could buy multiple ones, stick them in your pocket. It's a small camera. It's gonna have a small battery, so I wouldn't complain too much about the battery on the A7S. All right, for the very difficult question of which camera is right for you, this is really tough to answer because I don't do a whole bunch of different disciplines like wedding videography or anything like that. So take this with a grain of salt. But if I were doing weddings, I would say if I was in a dark reception hall and I was doing video, I would grab the A7S. But if I was doing stuff during the day and it's like event videography, and I gotta nail the focus every single time, I would pick a smaller sensor like the Micro Four Thirds, and if I'm doing run and gun and trying to keep things in focus, definitely the GH4 for that. In terms of like real estate photography or videos, I would say the A7S because it's, again, easier to shoot wide because of wide lenses if it's like photography wise. But then again, the GH4 if you get a nice wide lens for it, you got in doing videos, I would say the GH4 might win out just because you have so much detail. Next up, if I was shooting at ISO 3200 for sports in slow motion in a dark gymnasium, I'd probably use the A7S, but if it was a well-lit gymnasium and I wanted to capture all that great detail, I would use the GH4. Again, this is just a really difficult question to answer. In terms of glide cam work, I'd say the GH4 wins because it's overall a lighter camera, unless you were able to get some sort of pancake lens for the A7S, which then it might actually work better. But the GH4 would work better on a glide cam because a micro four thirds sensor, you're going to keep everything in focus, and when you're on a glide cam, you can't remotely focus that easily, so it might actually work good for that. All right, in terms of vacations, I would definitely reach for the GH4 before the A7S because it's a smaller, lightweight, complete package. And then in terms of, let's say you're brand spanking new to this and you're thinking, should I get the A7S or GH4? I'm brand new, what do I get? I would say if you're brand new to this, don't even buy either. Go buy a used Canon T2i on Craigslist. I've seen them, $200. Then go buy a 100 or a used 50mm, probably cost you maybe $80 for a 50mm 1.8 prime. Slap it on there, use that until the GH5 comes out or the A7 whatever comes out. Because that Canon T2i for $200, you will learn so much for the year or two that before the next camera comes out. And then when you're ready, and you will be ready at that point, and then you can graduate to the GH5 or whatever. All right, the A7S is better than the Panasonic in terms of audio for two reasons. The first reason is the A7S has balanced inputs going into the hot shoe, which I think is a wonderful idea, being able to use the hot shoe for that kind of situation, which means that you can run your cables for your shotgun microphones a lot longer distance than, let's say, 10 or 15 feet like I'm doing here with the Rode VideoMic Pro. The second reason, and the more important reason, that the A7S wins over the GH4 is the GH4 has an audio sync issue. And the best way I can describe it is if you were to use a clapper, you'll actually hear the audio 25 milliseconds before you see the clapper come together. And I've seen this numerous times. I've tested it numerous different ways, and every single time the audio is preceding the video by about 20-25 milliseconds. Now what happens to make this problem worse is, and I've seen many threads on this before, is Vimeo within a Firefox browser, and this is why it doesn't happen that often, as many people maybe not be using that browser with Vimeo. They might be just publishing to YouTube, which does not have this problem. Or it might be being displayed on an iPhone or Android device, which might not have this problem wherever you're watching these videos. But when it comes to Vimeo within a Firefox browser, there seems to be something going on where it adds one more frame of audio. So instead of it being 20 milliseconds, it becomes like 60 milliseconds because one frame is about 40 milliseconds. So it makes it even worse. You'll hear the clap and then it happens 60 milliseconds later. Now the TV broadcasting standards, whatever, say you can lead by maybe 10 milliseconds and lag by 30 and you'll still be acceptable. People won't see your lips being off that much. In our case, we're way ahead of that. We're like 60 instead of 10 where it's recommended. So it's definitely an issue. And I can see when I'm watching people's videos on Vimeo in a Firefox browser, I can say, yep, they're using a GH4. I don't even have to ask them because I can see just how off their lips are matching up with the audio. Now there is a way around this, obviously. You can take, after you've done all your final edit, take the interview portion or whatever the dialogue is, and then just shift it by like a frame or two, and it should correct it quite nicely. Because it doesn't drift over time, it's just happening for whatever. And hopefully we'll get back from Panasonic and hear what they have to say about this. Maybe it could be addressed in a firmware update where they correct the buffer, how it goes into the audio section of the wrapper or whatever is going on. I have no idea, but maybe they can hopefully fix that for us. All right, this is the conclusion. If you skipped ahead, you're at the right place. So what do I think about these two cameras? The A7S, first off, I love that you can just pretty much shoot at any ISO and you're going to do so cleanly without so much, hardly any noise. 6400, 12,000, 25,000, it looks all really good. Whereas the GH4, I love how at ISO 800 and lower, you can get such a clean, detailed image coming off the 4K sensor and being downsampled to 1080. It's hard to beat. I've done tests with it against the Red Epic in terms of just looking at detail, and it keeps up incredibly well. When it comes to the full frame look, I can't deny it, but I love the look of it. The A7S is awesome when it comes to getting nice shallow depth of field. You can do it on the GH4. Cost money, or it's a little harder to do because you have to buy some really fast glass for the GH4, but you can definitely do it. Can't quite keep up with the A7S in terms of getting those really creamy backgrounds and knocking everything out of focus. So yeah, I do talk about how the GH4 can kind of keep up, but I do love the A7S on how easy it is to knock things out of focus. On the flip side, I love the GH4 because it's so unintimidating in terms of the person that's on the other side of the glass. When they're looking down, let's say about an 80mm thread size, like on the Tamron 24-70, that's a big chunk of glass that you're looking at, and you can get kind of intimidated if you're the talent. But on the flip side, when the GH4, let's say you're around 50mm thread size, it's a lot smaller piece of glass, and it looks less intimidating. So if you've got talent that's not used to being talent, I think you can get better images with people not being so stressed out that they're staring down the barrel of a very large piece of glass. I love with the GH4 how you can record internally inside the camera 4K. Can't do that on the A7S. You could do it to a Shogun, but it adds extra cables, batteries, things that can go wrong. GH4, lovely image, 4K. And it's one of those things where when you start editing with it and you see the possibilities, and it makes you a better editor because of the options that you have to pan scan around the image, crop in, do all that stuff. It's one of those features you don't want to let go of. All right, I know these cameras have very different sensor sizes, but I think they're really evenly matched. You've seen me going back and forth with the pros and cons on these two cameras. So which one did I buy? I ended up buying both of them. I sold my Canon gear, and I came out kind of like, after selling a lot of my Canon gear and buying these two, I didn't have to spend that much extra money because I sold some of my Canon glass as well. So that kind of puts me in a world of hurt in terms of matching them when I do a 2-camera shoot for an interview, because they are very different in color, and I haven't quite grasped the color of the A7S yet. And that's why I've been kind of reviewing these, like a Macbeth chart and this one-shot chart from DSC Labs. I'll be doing some videos on these in the future in terms of how to match your camera up, because I can definitely get them close, if not very, very close, where you can't even notice the difference, but it takes a lot of work. Not that I mind the work, because I want to get better at color, and this is a great way to do it, is seeing the different characteristics of two different cameras and trying to match them in post. All right, basically there's two types of people out there. The person that buys a camera, keeps it for a very long period of time, and can tell wonderful stories with it, from stills to videos, whatever. Then there's the person, perhaps like myself, who sees a bright new shiny object like the A7S and says, oh my gosh, I've got to have that. That'll help my storytelling because A, I won't have to deal with aliasing amore, and B, the EVF will have better focus and better exposure that I'll get from it. But really, when it comes down to it, if not working on my storytelling, the camera's really going to only help me like that much, because I might have a little bit cleaner images, or they might be a little bit more in focus. Let me give you an example. So I was up in the mountains with James Drake, who owns a Red Epic, and he's been shooting for many, many years. Fantastic at what he does. And I was getting some very generic shots of the waterfall where he was getting in and he was getting all these great compositions, great angles. He was moving the camera in such a way where it didn't matter that he was on a Red Epic at all. You could have given him an iPhone that shot at 120 frames per second and he could still outshoot me with the A7S. I guarantee you he could do it, because I've watched him shoot and I've watched him in post. The guy is amazing. Really, it just comes from years of experience of him telling stories. That's kind of how I want to leave it is, like I said before, if you're brand new to this, don't buy either one of these cameras. Just go buy a used T2i and get started that way. But if you want to get a little bit cleaner images like I talked about, these two cameras are definitely the next step, I think. Especially if you're shooting, I would say, more than 60% video and maybe 40% stills, or maybe, I'm just pulling that number out of my whatever. Well, let's say you shoot 75% video and 25% stills. These are definitely the cameras for you. If you're shooting, let's say, 10% video and 90% stills, I would say I would stay with Canon or Nikon in that case. And that's pretty much it. Like I've said, these cameras reviews take a really long time. If you want to help support what I do so I can make more of them, definitely use the links below for the lenses, the cameras, the charts, whatever I've got listed on my gear page. I got just about everything listed on my gear page. And it definitely helps me buy new equipment so I can do more reviews and all this great stuff. All right, that's pretty much it. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.